Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the Chairman of Monmouthshire County Council.
First of all, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Madam Chairman, just Matt Feakin from our side. Bob's on his way back from a funeral, so he'll be with us as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Tudor Thomas, Councillor Dave Evans, Councillor Jim Higginson, and Councillor Kevin Williams.
Councillor Jez Beckett gives his apologies.
Thank you. Val, did you?
Yes. Councillors Howard and Councillor Bakeworth.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. I've been asked by the Chief Executive if he would mind us moving the pay policy, that's one, isn't it? Pay policy to the end, because if officers have to leave the room, it makes more sense that they go out at the end of the meeting rather than have to be going in and out all the time. So I hope that's all right if nobody's got any objections. No. Right, so we go on to item 4, corporate plan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Good to be here today, and pleased to present the corporate plan today and to consider and approve that plan, which articulates the authority's purpose and values alongside our ambitious programme that will be prioritised over the next 4.5 years. In October last year, Cabinet commissioned the development of a corporate plan which converts our high-level political ambition into a tight and understandable whole authority strategic plan. And the plan draws draws on the political priorities articulated in our group's manifesto, but it also picks up the emerging Cabinet member priorities, those challenges which were highlighted in the wellbeing assessment, and some of those key messages that you all would have heard on the doors, and some of the challenges that have come forward through future Monmouthshire. Once the budget is finalised on March the 1st, the medium-term financial plan will be obviously adjoined and appended into this report. The corporate plan restates the Council's purpose of building sustainable and resilient communities, and it also outlines the 5 priority goals or objectives, and under each of these sits a number of work streams. You will see at the bottom of the report itself there are some 22 of those. And those are the areas that the organisation will commit to between now and 2022. And they focus around those 5 areas of the best possible start in life, thriving and connected communities, natural and built environment, lifelong well-being, and future-focused council. Some of the 22 commitments, such as building of new schools, has already been approved by the Council as part of the agreed policy position, whilst others are in the early stages of development. So each new proposal brought forward to deliver against these goals will be subject to an individual decision as aligned to our constitution. So, you know, there are various degrees of progress on some of those 22, obviously because we've been, doing a lot of work over the last year. The plan sets out clearly the Council's purpose. It contains, as I mentioned, those 5 specific objectives which can be measured over time. And the report also shows how we're looking to measure against those priorities as we move forward. And these are all clearly aligned to the purpose and well-being objectives of the Public Service Board. It was fundamental that those views were captured in this corporate plan. The actions to deliver the plan will be embedded in the service plans or the business plans of the various teams around the council, and progress then can be tracked all year round via the hub as currently you can do now. And a full evaluation of progress will be produced annually for scrutiny and will be reported to Council. It's very clearly Cabinet members will be working on the key areas and be monitoring progress and be more than happy to obviously report where they are on those. And clearly I'm sure scrutiny will want to have a close eye that we are meeting the objectives we've set ourselves over the period. Madam Chairman, that's pretty well the introduction to the report. Obviously, Cabinet members here are all willing and able to talk to their specific areas as questions arise. I hope members find that the report reads easily and is a really solid layout which enables people to navigate through this. And I want to really give some thanks to all of the staff members who've pulled this together on our behalf. We gave them the lines which we wanted and the areas we needed to be covered, and clearly they've moulded all of the elements which are important to the council, things which are already happening, things from the wellbeing assessment, from the Public Service Board, political aspirations, and those pulled together in this overarching corporate document. This is a fundamental plan for the council going forward, and so it is an important document. So I hope members recognise of that. Madam Chairman, I don't think I'll wade through each page and highlight the importance of the various points. I'm sure there'll be debate flowing from this, but we do want to maintain our commitment to helping to build sustainable, resilient communities and support the well-being of current future generations. And I hope you believe that that's been captured well in here. And our values remain as they have for many years, of openness, fairness, flexibility and teamwork, and those don't change. I hope you believe also that the design principles that we've outlined there on page 37 or page 7 of the plan are the right building blocks and principles to design this plan on. Madam Chairman, I think I'll leave it there because we'll clearly be opening up a debate, no doubt, about the various areas. And as I said, our colleagues my colleagues will come in and help answer any questions which they get put to us. But I think from the political perspective, I suppose those key headline messages are outlined on page 11 and bullet pointed there. Those are the key political things as well, which are very important to us, and we believe that they go a long way to making this council a far better and fairer place to live. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Petruni.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Leader, for that intro. So I'll start with the positives about the corporate plan. It's by far the most clear plan in terms of priorities and measurables, which I've been here 6 years now, and that is something to be welcomed. It's taken 6 years, but we're finally there. Hallelujah to that. more broadly, though, the corporate plan is basically a record of failure. A record of failure by the Conservatives in the past 5 years, and now they're trying to address that record of failure. So let's start with the best possible start in life. The attainment gap between free school meal pupils and non-free school meal pupils in Monmouthshire is at 44%, the highest it's been in the last 3 years. One of the highest in Wales, and we have been the worst in Wales for the last 3 years. So that's just dealing with a mess that we've been inherited. Moving on to thriving and connected communities. One of those thriving connected communities is related to houses and house building. Last September, reported by the BBC and by our own, and it's been updated, but by our own acknowledgement, we're nearly 800 houses short from our own plan being built. So we're looking to build on, we've got a record of failure on housing, not building enough housing, and we're looking to try and arrest that failure. Given that Monmouthshire house prices are starting to skyrocket, people being left out of the housing ladder, local people, let's hopefully you'll be successful in this next 5 years than you were in the last 5. Moving on to natural and built environment. Normally nothing wrong with that. And then we talk about nitro oxide and pollution in our streets and how we're going to deal with it rightly. Important issue, Hardwick Hill in Chepstow, one of the biggest pollution areas, standstill traffic certainly in the county. And when I look at the Pacifics, we're just installing 5 new monitoring equipments. That's not dealing with an issue. That's just installing monitoring equipments. I would welcome any more concrete plan than that. But we've failed in the last 5 years, and I accept it's not completely Monmouthshire's fault, related to other local councils in the area, and there's Welsh Government involvement as well. But it is a record of failure. We haven't dealt with huge issues, and I relate to Chepstow, so we need to get on with that. And on the Future Focused Council, which is the most interesting of them all, which is, I get from it, basically how do we successfully manage cuts? That's how it is. And I wouldn't expect any less from Conservative Manifesto. But this is a record of failure. It's trying to address those failures in the previous 5 years. And in that sense, well, at least you recognise where you've failed. But I have a couple of specifics, if I may. Item 10, the circular economy. Interesting. Could we have a bit more on that? Will that be more developed? Will there be a paper on that? It seems to be in there as a throwaway. But it is an interesting concept, and I'll be very keen to hear more about it. Item 13 talks about nudge policies in terms of speeding. When did we start looking at nudge behavioural economics? When did that happen? Was it something I've missed, maybe? If you could let me know when we adopted behavioural economics, that'd be great. Item 15, about tackling the most vulnerable people in our society. Completely agree on this side of the chamber on that. But it fails to talk about universal credit. And about to hit in July, and the horror reports we're hearing from Torfaen of that Conservative Westminster cut, and the damage it's doing to the most vulnerable people in our communities, that seems to be largely missing. And on a more generic point, where it says how we're doing this, some of the how we're doing it is really, really vague. For example, we will reduce child poverty. Yeah, agree with that, but that's not how you're doing it, is it? That's just a statement. I could say, anyone could say that. To be honest, that's really needed. At present, from an independent charity, there are currently 3,700 children in poverty in Monmouthshire, an increase of 2% in the last 3 years. So, can you just be more specific on that? And the big driver of that is, incidentally, is housing, which is another one of your failures. So rather than just saying bland, inane statements that anyone could say, could you be more specific? On the corporate plan itself, we will abstain, because we can't endorse a record of failure, but we're abstaining because you did win the election, and it is your manifesto.
Who's next? Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just make one brief point, and it's nice to hear Dimitri's cracked record of failure, because he says the same things over and over again. And by most measures, including those of the Welsh Government, this council is one, if not the best performing in Wales. Despite the resources shortage, it suffers. I just wanted to highlight how Dimitri yet again picks up the issue of the shortage of housing completions compared with a plan. Many of these factors are completely out of the council's control, but also how his group decided to abstain on the last LDP and in fact didn't support any of those housing developments, which he seems to now seek. Hopefully now we have the benefit of an LDP review. He'll put his money where his mouth is and see about proactively finding some
Clarification,
housing.
Chairman, if I may. We didn't abstain. We voted for more affordable housing than Tories voted us down.
Thank you. Don't.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And again, Dimitri repeats his myth. He did vote for a higher percentage, but then by not voting for the plan, you voted for a higher percentage of nothing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you want to come back?
I think some cabinet colleagues may, Madam Chairman, want to pick up on some of the points, and I'm sure.
Yes. Who'd like? Councillor John.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to say a few words about some of the education proposals in here, which I have to say I beg to differ with Councillor Petruni. I think this is the most interesting bit about how we offer our children the very best start in life. Because this is about how we set young people on a path to adulthood and how they can start their journey towards having a successful career. So in our proposals, we're going to continue our school building plans. We've already seen the development of a £90 million investment in Caldecott and Monmouth comprehensive schools. This is investing in state-of-the-art learning environments for young people, and that includes an £800,000 investment in brand new technology in each of those two schools. In September, we set out our proposals for the next stage of the 21st Century Schools programme, and that's developing new schools in Abergavenny and Chepstow. And in the coming years, we're going to be developing those plans, and much of the preparatory work on those proposals is already underway. We're going to continue to work with teachers and school leaders to drive up standards and improve further on the strong performance we've had in our schools in recent years. So in 2017, we were the top performing local authority at the foundation phase. In fact, we have been the top performing in 4 of the last 5 years. At Key Stage 2, we've been the top performing of 22 councils in 3 of the last 5 years. Last year, we were the second top performing local authority at Key Stage 3. And we've been the top performing local authority at Key Stage 4. So this is on the measure of 5 good GCSEs, A star to C, including English and maths. That's 3 of the last 5 years. So if you want to talk about our record, we're very happy to talk about it. You will have seen in the past couple of days that the new school categorisation figures came out. In 2014-15, we only had 3 green schools in our county. We've now got 13. We've seen a reduction in the number of yellow schools, a reduction in the number of amber schools. So we're making progress on categorisation as well. And we're going to continue that work to drive up standards with leaders in our schools. We're also going to continue to do what we can to support the more vulnerable students in our society. We know that the gap in performance between students who are eligible for free school meals and those who are not eligible is too wide, particularly at Key Stage 4. We accept that, and we all need to do more to address it. But we also need to recognise where our work to support vulnerable students is working really well. And if you look at the conclusions of the Social Mobility Commission, which was published last year, we're the 3rd best performing local authority when it comes to social mobility and enabling every student to achieve their full potential. So you can see that we do have some great successes, particularly in primary schools, by offering the very best opportunities. But as I say, that gap, particularly at Key Stage 4, is too wide, and we need to address it. So we're going to continue to work with our school leaders to drive up standards. We're going to be working with our schools to examine ways in which we can further improve standards of leadership in our school system and how we can continue to attract the very best to Monmouthshire. So we have a plan. It's a plan that I look forward to us delivering over the next 4 years, and I'm confident that we'll do that with the support of everyone who works in our school system.
Councillor Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of specifics that Councillor Petruni mentioned. And you've talked about child poverty. This plan is going to be about preventing poverty, not just reducing poverty. It's going to be about encouraging people into work and improving the lives of those in poverty through all the elements that the plan highlights. But if you're looking for the specifics, which clearly we can't list every single thing that we're doing in terms of trying to reduce poverty in our county, we're developing that approach through the FEDIP group, so working with our partners. We're looking at across the life course to identify the key organisations and players that can help to identify and plug those gaps. We're delivering parenting support across the county through our Flying Start scheme, and despite the fact that we no longer have Communities First programmes available to us, we're doing as much as we can to identify monies and mirror activity in the Flying Start areas to help those in most need. We're developing the Building Strong Families team, which is going to focus on early intervention and prevention, and that's going to hopefully have the ability then for us to identify some of the issues that we really need to address. And we're also going to look to see how we can support our communities, those that want to be able to build those social support structures, working with our community and partnership development team and working right across the county to ensure that we do indeed address the point of reducing child poverty. You mentioned universal credit. Yes, we're all aware that that's coming, and there will be a seminar for all members in April, which I'm working with partners on. I regularly meet the partners on the FEDIP group to address what the concerns are around universal credit. It's very much at the forefront of our minds as part of the social justice piece, and I'm very confident that this plan is going to address those issues appropriately and effectively.
Councillor Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The questions of housing. As I think we all know, most councils in Wales have not kept up with their housing building programme. We're no different from those, and we recognise that. And that is why back in November we issued a consultation to the public and other stakeholders about whether we should now review our LDP. That period of consultation ends around about now. I would anticipate that there will be a move to review the LDP. And ahead of that, we have already penciled in an extra council meeting to move that forward in March. So we are very aware of the issues of housing. But of course, we're all wanting more affordable housing. But affordable housing is paid for by market housing. And therefore, we will need to look right across the board at our housing needs. But if we're looking at the LDP, also hand in hand with that goes opportunities for further economic development. And we will be looking at land use for that as well. So we are very much on the ball, starting now, and we're going to sort this one out.
Councillor Taylor.
Oh, there we are. Okay, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I think I was quite surprised, actually, not to see, or I said not that I could find any reference at all in the corporate plan to issues such as, for example, public transport, or what we are doing to refocus the services that we provide or have influence on others, given that it's such an important focus of attention in the well-being type objectives aligned with the Public Service Board. I also didn't see anything in terms of the future around the impact of the removal of the 7 tolls. I think that has a significant potential impact on our county. We've kind of talked about a few of the issues, I suppose, but there's nothing explicit in there. And I would have thought that that is going to have an impact on all manner of things, such as, for example, certainly our services, our housing, the housing issues that we already face, and other matters. I also think that if we talk about the piece around having the best start in life or addressing poverty, whilst yes, I accept that there are some interventions happening, I think what we also should really reflect is that those interventions are really only focused around the personal and social aspects of poverty. There is nothing in here around how we recognise that the structural long-term, so things like benefits, issues such as housing, issues such as not just the outcomes for children, but the education system, how, what we are doing to use our influence in that area, to recognise that either we are not going to be able to influence those things, or we recognise the limits, because I think it's quite naive to talk about preventing or reducing poverty without taking into account some of those factors which effectively are at the heart of long-term persistent poverty. So I'd be interested in a reflection from whoever's appropriate. Those are fairly cross-cutting matters around, in particular, why some of those future pressures on the county, which are short, medium and long-term, are not reflected in this plan. Thank you.
Councillor Penny-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back in fact what Trony has said, and I really take issue with the word failure when it comes across the board. I'd just like to point out that Monmouthshire has had a policy of maximising the opportunities for people to live an independent lifestyle for quite a long time, and it has been very, very successful. And it was only last week at various meetings with ministers such as Hugh Ranker-Davies and Vaughan Gethin, the Cabinet Minister, where Monmouthshire was publicly acknowledged as being an innovative council and very successful in certain areas of social services, well, in particular to do with independent living, and we had areas of best practice. So I would like that acknowledged, and really I don't think the word failure is applicable. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. To come back to some comments made earlier by the Cabinet Member for Education, I really do feel that we need to respond. But before I do, praise where it's due, and it is good to see this Council enthusiastically supporting the Welsh Labour Government's 21st Century Schools programme, and it is doing a lot to raise the quality of education in those secondary schools, the one that's already open, and looking to the future, it will help to provide a much more effective education for our secondary school children. Now, the Cabinet Member talked about the gap between the performance of all children and the performance of those children who benefit from free school meals. And he said it was too wide. That's a mastery of understatement. This county actually benefits by many socio-economic advantages. You would almost expect our children to do well with the advantages they get from the parental start in life that they have. I don't know how many members saw on BBC Two last night the programme about the impact of disadvantage on the lives of young people. It was devastating and heartbreaking. What I would say is that if you strip away that socio-economic advantage, those children that don't benefit from that and take those as a cohort, and compare that with a similar cohort elsewhere in Wales, then Monmouthshire's youngsters are underperforming and underachieving. When you look at our Year 11 outcomes, that's when we send our youngsters out into the world very often. What we have left those youngsters who need the support that their parents sometimes can't give them is lacking. And when you look at Monmouthshire's performance at Key Stage 4, it is often severely lacking. This is when you really do see the benefits of a good start in life. And we're sending our children out there without that benefit in too many cases. We are, for example, looking at the average point score for 15-year-olds in Wales, 18th. In the Welsh ranking order. When you look at the performance of youngsters who are on free school meals in Year 11, it is not only low, it is getting worse. Absolutely. And it is a disgrace that this authority still sends youngsters out into the job world not performing at an equal level as youngsters from many parts of Wales where many more youngsters suffer that disadvantage. Where we should be leading, we actually follow. And I would say that far from putting education on a pedestal here, actually there is still a huge way to go, and I do not see any method of addressing that in this plan that is being put to us this afternoon. The reality, Chair, is that we have a system which is failing the most needy, and that the gap there is getting worse. This is a recipe that will not bring about improvement in the future.
Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've been here so many times before, and you look at this corporate plan and it's absolutely fantastic, and I for one would love to be sitting here. I'm sure I won't be in 5 years' time, but I'd like to be watching in 5 years' time to say we've achieved all this. It is not going to be possible, but we on this side will do our best to help where we possibly can, and we will certainly do our very best to point out where you're not doing it properly. And I hope, and I've made this plea many, many times before, that you listen to us some of the time. There's more of you than us, so every time you stick your hands up, you win. But that doesn't necessarily mean you've got all the best ideas. So just keep in mind that we're all in this together, and I've said that many a time before, and we all know where that's come from. If you want this to succeed, you need our help. You need scrutiny from us. You need to take on board positive scrutiny to aid and assist, as opposed to thinking it's just negative, chuck it in the bin, they don't know what they're talking about. You will get our help where you deserve our help. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Fox, do you want to come back? Yes. Who does this?
Thank you, members. It's difficult to know where to start, really. But Dimitri, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed, and record of failure. I mean, I don't know how you, as a Labour member, can talk about failure. I mean, Labour in Wales is a failure. They've demonstrated that again and again. You talk about children in poverty. Yet we have Wales languishing at the bottom of the heap, sadly, with 200,000 plus children in poverty. And that's been the same year on year and year. And your government, who so say believe in social justice, can't touch the surface. And what do? On the top of that, they scrap a MEAG grant. Such an important grant to help those minority ethnic communities across Wales. They slice that without any consideration of social justice, of future well-being. And, so don't lecture us about what we're doing. We're trying really, really hard to make a significant difference in this county, and we have been doing that year on year. We never will be perfect, but we will be striving to do things a lot better. And this plan lays out things very, very well on that. And Roger, you talk about listening. The reality is, you never come forward with anything to listen to. Not once in my chamber do I have a Labour member knock my door and say, Leader, would you like to have a discussion around this element of provision? Can I offer you this advice? No, that is absolutely true. And not once, Dimitri, have you come to my door and sat with me and said, let's adopt some of our Labour policies in addressing some of these social inclusion issues. It's rubbish, you don't.
Point of clarification, Chairman, I wasn't going to do a tit for tat. I wasn't going to do a tit for tat, but we have had that conversation. You're going to say no, I'm going to say yes. But just to say, we did.
No. Madam Chairman, I know who comes to my office and talks to me. I know who that, and I'm not lying or anything like that. Nobody comes and talks to me. I am willing to listen. Phil lays down every year when we set this budget an opportunity for members of the opposition to come and present other ideas to us. Not once do you do that. You'll do it on March the 1st. You'll make some big play about a whole raft of things which are going to change the world, but you haven't even thought about them, and you will come to us right late in the day. So I won't take lectures off you on that. Francis, seven tolls are are mentioned, and they're mentioned in the thriving economy section. Okay, we can't add every bit of detail into this of the work that's happening. There's a study being commissioned to understand just what the effects of the 7 toll reductions will be and what the opportunities will be alongside of that. And that will be very, very, very important to all of us as we move forward with LDP discussions, with future economic growth discussions. So it's a really important element. And linked in with that wider consideration of City Deal will be the considerations of future transport and public transport, because you're quite right. Public transport is sadly lacking in many areas of Wales, and certainly it's an area which we need further improvement in large rural authorities like ours. That's why, as a city region, we're looking at trying to move toward a strategic development plan which picks up those wider transport issues. And we have a very active transport working group here who are constantly lobbying, feeding into the Transport Authority to help us influence those things as we go forward. Martin, I bow to your judgment as an educationalist on schools, but I don't accept what you're saying. I wish you would take some of that advice and plant it in some of your own party's minds, because sadly Labour have let down this country year on year. That's why we're languishing at the bottom of so many tables in so many areas, and there's so many authorities who are sadly letting their children down in this country. And Monmouthshire isn't one of those. Monmouthshire is a county that is investing in its young people's future. It's looking to give them the very best opportunities in life. But I, like you, do not like that gap. The gap between those who are eligible for free school meals, and that gap needs closing. And I know Richard believes that, Will believes that. The whole authority needs to work together to strive toward narrowing that gap, and that's really important. Hence the social justice agenda as well. We are clearly looking to close the gap in many ways. No other Labour authority in Wales has even considered talk about social justice. Put your money where your mouth is. Put your money into putting in social justice focus in a lot more meaningful way, because you're not doing it. Labour is not doing it across Wales. We are doing it here, and Sarah is going to really, and is already really focusing hard on this area. You will be seeing a social justice strategy coming forward shortly, which will stitch some of that thinking together. So, Madam Chairman, it annoys me sometimes that we have all this diatribe from the opposition, yet then they won't support a plan. Turning their back on the Public Service Board, the good people who contributed to the wellbeing assessment, turning your back on those things where you should actually be standing up for those people and working with us. Come to my door. Come and ask me. Come and help me build, and you don't. No, you don't. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Right. Peter's put forward this corporate plan. Is there a seconder for the plan? Thank you. All those in favour of the plan, please raise.
That's carried, Chairman.
Petition for me.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was a petition from the Chepstow area against the ADM. It's over 200 petitions, 200 signatures, should I say. And the main message from these residents was that the leisure centres in particular should maintain a clear line of accountability and transparency to voters. And I hand in the petition.
Right, we will now go on to item 5, active travel integrated network maps. Who's starting this? Who wants to? Councillor Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As part of the Active Travel Wales Act 2013, Monmouthshire County Council must submit so-called integrated network maps, basically maps of key walking and cycling route networks that we wish to deliver over the next 15 years to the Welsh Government for each of the 7 largest settlements in the county. Draft maps were developed by officers, discussed at the Council Strategic Transport Group. Then there was a further 3-month public consultation, which ended on the 16th of January, and following further discussion at the Strategic Transport Group, the maps are now presented to the full Council for approval. Some of the routes are already existing and require little work to bring them up to the required standard, e.g. those delivered in Monmouth under the Monmouth Links project, while others are aspirations, currently no more than lines on the map. Members should note that the Welsh Government requires us to identify routes that we wish to deliver within the 5 years, and these are noted in the route list and highlighted on the first set of maps. MCC expects to be given £175,000 in 2018/19 to further develop individual routes into projects that can be delivered. The deadline for submitting the maps to the Welsh Government is 28th of February, and this must be met as we already have had an extension. I will not offer to answer any questions, but I will pass that to Christian Schmidt, who does our travel stuff, because my hearing is so atrocious today, I can't hear anybody.
Councillor Batruni.
Yes, Chairman. I was interested why the Welsh Government had to issue a direction for the authority to actually do this. It had to issue it on the 4th of December. And we were late. We should have delivered on the 3rd of November. I'm just interested why we were so late.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, we did receive an extension to carry out this works. We were all the local authorities which have carried out this work have used specialist consultants to carry out the works. Quite frankly, there hasn't been enough to go around. We have engaged with our framework contractors to do it. As those staff have come available, we have now used them to prepare this, and the Welsh Government gave us an extension to allow that to happen.
Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a small request, and certainly support the report, and thanks to Christian and Paul for the work they do. And their job must be one of the hardest in the council, because certainly we as members and the general public bombard them with all sorts of requests. So I appreciate their workload is massive. I should have picked this up before and said it's a small request that the route that's identified as A18 from Gypsy Lane to the proposed new bridge at Llanfoist. I wonder if it might be possible just to extend that a little further along towards the entrance with Grove Farm. As you'll be aware, there's an outline development there for 100-odd houses, and if that can be tied into what goes on there and provide a safer route, that would be most welcome. Thanks.
Yes is the answer, no problem.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say how much I value the opportunity to go to the seminar at Court Blethin, where members had a chance to to make their own input into the plans. One specific request, I think, for the community that I seek to serve, and it follows on from the point made a moment ago. Llanfoist, we are about, hopefully, to benefit from a new bridge for pedestrians and cyclists that will remove some of the horror of trying to cross the River Usk at Llanfoist. At the moment, there is not a direct cycle or pedestrian route from where that will make landfall on the Abergavenny side up to the town centre. Many people have asked me if anything was going to happen, could I make an earnest request that we guarantee that there will be a direct track from the end of the bridge to the town centre.
Yes, the map show that's one of the routes which you want to develop. Effectively what happened is that because of the demand for some time to have a better crossing, we sort of started off developing this before we actually submitted the maps. Of course, there was an opportunity in which government effectively provided us funding, but they only provided funding previously for this specific link. We now got general funding, or we hope to get general funding next financial year, and some of this will hopefully be used to look at the links to and from the bridge. It's just we had to prioritize one thing.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The question I wanted to ask was that I put in a response myself to this consultation, and it was on page 164, which was for Paul Merrick Chepstow, and quite a number of the consultation responses seemed to say to TBD, and not give a proper response back. So I just wondered what was going to happen to those particular responses. I am concerned looking at the legislation, but obviously it is within the law that these active travel matters are only looking at towns as opposed to rural areas, and I just wondered what consideration the council was going to give to rural and cycle travel routes that were in villages, and obviously Monmouthshire is quite a rural area. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As far as the consultation report goes, we did look at all the responses primarily to see what changes do we need to do as the maps. So that's really what we have looked at. What we haven't really come on is going back to each consultation response to saying, well, actually, how we're going to take this forward. Partly this is related to that when we wrote this consultation report, we didn't know whether we had any funding. So we only know now we're likely to have some funding next year. So we will have to complete this and probably send it back to members of the Strategic Transport Group and all councillors to saying how we're actually going to take the individual suggestions forwards. In terms of the wider issue, we have asked Welsh Government about this. They have said that you can go beyond your settlements, and in particular, if you look at Pomeric, you can see on the maps that we actually said, well, we need to link between Caldicot and Chepstow via Pomeric and the other towns in between. We really haven't thought much further about this one because the work to get these maps done was quite about as much as we could handle at the time being. So we put down something like this. There are a couple of other requests from the maps which you can see about links into towns, which we've tried to include, about things which don't really access anything like this. And we do had a couple of responses and a couple of requests, for example, of active travel routes in Raglan, which isn't one of the towns. At the moment, we're not quite sure how to handle this. We're certainly going to raise it with Welsh Government and come back to you if that's okay.
Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk about the B4245 in the south of the county. This was brought to the Cemetery Area Committee a number of years ago, and it's been referred to every year since then by myself to Highways. It was recently brought back to the Cemetery Area Committee by a member of the public who was concerned about the actual route from what are the mega offices right the way through to Port Stewart. It's a very dangerous road. It's got 4 or 5 different speed limits, one which is 60 miles an hour. In fact, only recently 2 very serious accidents occurred on that stretch of road. Whether it was speed or not, it's not for me to decide. But we had a survey done by Capita Simons in 2012, which I passed to Councillor Dimmick, because she wasn't here at the time. At the time, it was Miss Crook and Councillor Taylor and Councillor Guppy. We will be having a visit by the Highways to the next MSI committee meeting to discuss this. But it's been bidded on to the Welsh Government for the last number of years, been unsuccessful. In about 2014-15, I think it was put on hold because of the plans for the new M4 relief road, because it was going to be incorporated in, hopefully incorporated in that. That hasn't happened, and we're still waiting about the relief road, but we still need this road to be made safe. And there's no doubt that the councils in the west of Caldicot will vouch the fact that the road between Roggett and Undy is a death trap waiting for something to happen. But it also carries very, very heavy lorries, 40 tonners, come off the motorway at Mega, use the B4245 all the way through Caldicot, Roggett, Mega and Undy, damaging the roads to start with and really being a danger to the rest of the traffic. They should be, in my mind, taken down the A48 and routed in a different way. So it's on the list of aspirations. It's been on that list of aspirations for a while. But I would ask that highways, like Mr. Schmidt is fully aware of what I'm going to say, is that this be taken up strongly with the Welsh Government to try and make sure we get a bid in which is successful, which we can create this major link through from Portskewitt right the way through to Mega, and at the same time create a standard speed limit, not 4 or 5 speed limits, and get rid of the 60-mile-an-hour speed limit. It's a big issue, big matter. Yes, I came to Court Blethen, I raised it there, and I've raised it, Paul Keeble is smiling, many times in the past, and I will continue. And no doubt I would hope I get some support off the other members to the west of Caldicot. Thank you.
I could comment on it, Madam Chairman. Councillors and other members, Councillor Taylor, have made the issues around the issues surrounding B4245 doesn't fit comfortably within the Active Travel Act and the plans which we're putting together there. That isn't to undermine the importance which members put to it. So I've arranged with Democratic Services to hold a special meeting with 7 side members, those who wish to come, and other members of the public who may wish to address that meeting, to look at the various items which are being raised. This is just not about active travel, it's about the type of vehicles using the road, it's about speed. There are numerous issues surrounding it. So the scheme is probably much wider than simply active travel, but it is a piece of work which we will arrange, and members will be advised shortly of the meeting.
Councillor Dimmock.
Thank you. Well, I understand what you said, and we're going to have a special meeting for this. We cannot ignore that 2 people have been hospitalised and are facing life-changing injuries. While we await the causes of these incidents by specialists that are investigating, speed is a major problem along the B4245, and I think all members with wards along this stretch of road know this. I would welcome an uninterrupted speed limit of the 30 mile an hour from Undy, Mega, Roggett, right through to Caldicot, and provide a safer environment for our residents. I also look forward to seeing the implementation of the proposed new pathway between Roggett and Undy to enable residents to travel safely.
Thank you, Chairman. Those matters will be no doubt addressed when we come together to look at the various options around managing that piece of road.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank Christian and the team that have been working on this, because I know that it's been quite a lot of work, and I have to say one of my concerns is that our capacity in that area of the business in terms of public transport and improving our active travel offer, our infrastructure is very, very small, members, and as we've seen from the PSB wellbeing objectives, it's a big concern for our wider public. I just leave that there, but I think it's an important point to register. Obviously, I concur with Councillor Dimmock around the B4245. It is very dangerous in the sense that it holds an awful lot of traffic, and that traffic does tend to, or there is certainly a perception that it travels more often than not at speed which exceeds 30 miles an hour. However, my point was just to say, really, I think that I welcome Mega being included in this because, as you will all know, Mega is not a town, although May-Granandy, although it has a population of 6,000 people. And so whilst it isn't a rural area, as Councillor Brown was talking about, it's certainly a very significant settlement. And probably this is one of the first times where it's had consideration in its own right as not being an outlying area of Caldecott. But the other point I'd like to make is that it's good to see that the proposed active travel routes have a proper purpose now. Previously, they have not. And I think it's also good to see them converging around the location, the preferred location for Mega Station and for the local square. Members may know that in no small part, due to the support of officers in the council, the Mega Rail Group have been successful in getting funding from Welsh Government for GRIP 3, which moves them along quite significantly in their proposal to have an active travel station at Mega. And I'd like to thank Councillor Dovey in particular for the work that the Strategic Transport Group has done to support that. So thank you. But I mean, clearly these are long term and there isn't any funding in place for most of these routes to be upgraded and improved to active travel standards, which I think is probably, or should be, a concern for us all. Thank you.
Councillor Brian Jones, do you want to sum up? Brian? Would you like to sum up? No, right over. Thank you very much. Now we move on to item 6, alternative delivery model. Councillor Greenwood.
Madam Chair, could I ask before we start that they're on their way down. Officers who will be probably needed to answer questions come towards the microphone. So, yeah. Thank you. Could I first of all welcome representatives from Anthony Collins with us today. Good to see you. Who are consultants on this issue, and no doubt will be answering some of the questions which will arise. May I first of all begin by saying, and perhaps clearing up a confusion. When we began on this process, 2 years ago, it was my natural assumption that it would go through the various select committees and it would be discussed in all sorts of meetings, and then would eventually come to Cabinet, and then from Cabinet on to Council. I was surprised when we got to Cabinet to find that, in fact, the constitution of the Council means that the decision is at this point, a matter of principle between whether we go for an alternative delivery model or a transform in-house model. The Constitution quite clearly says that that is a matter for Cabinet, an executive decision. That is not the way that I had understood it originally, and indeed that is why we had put into the agenda this council meeting today, so that this would come for consideration by members. However, that is the Constitution. But, and just to report that at its Cabinet meeting when it did consider it, Cabinet agreed that we should go forward with the ADM model. But that decision cannot be enacted without a decision by Council to grant some of the money that is required, as you will see in the report. And furthermore, that the really important issue will be the 5-year management plan, which we will need to see, and we will need to be happy as a council that we're prepared to go forward with that. So the decision is not taken out of the hands of the whole of council, and neither should it be. But the report, as it's drawn up today, is in line with the Constitution, and it simply asks Council to look at the 2 points of finance. But I.
What is your point of clarity is the point Councillor is talking about. Sorry, he's talking about is the process, which I'm not arguing with. But what I'm concerned about is that the decision by Cabinet was made on a certain date, then a date for today was met. It didn't give any opportunity for calling. My concern is why was there not an opportunity for members to call this in, which I tried to do, to make sure that we get to this meeting having determined a call in. Furthermore, you then turn the motion down. Thank you, Rob. Yeah.
Could you write it? Rob will put it. Can you explain, Rob?
Okay, Councillor Eason, perhaps I can assist. I'll try my best. There certainly was an opportunity to call that decision in that was made by Cabinet on the 29th of January. Absolutely, you could have done that. My own personal view, though, would have been, bearing in mind that this was coming before Council today, there wasn't a lot of merit, I think, in calling that decision in that you are having the opportunity now to look at those two recommendations and indeed talk about the ADM on a wider basis maybe. So your opportunity is today. So certainly in theory you could have called that decision in, but there wasn't really much point in it, I would suggest, in practice. So that's that's all I have to say on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So, it was never the intention of Cabinet or indeed this administration that members should not have the opportunity to discuss it, and that's what we're here today to do. But the report simply deals with what are the necessary parts that Council itself has to rule on from this point on. But clearly, as I said at the beginning, without the authority of Council to move forward with that money, the project can't go forward at this stage. So let's now look at the project. This has been 2 years in the planning to get to this stage. We originally looked at 4 different options, one of which was do nothing, and I think the other was outsourcing, was it? Was that right? Outsourcing, yep. And at an early stage, those 2 options were ruled out. And the 2 options that remained with us was an alternative delivery model and a transform in-house model. Since this council has been subject to such extreme budget pressures, every year the services which are outlined here, tourism, leisure, culture and youth, every year those services find themselves being asked to cut back and to contribute towards the necessary shortfall in funding that we have been delivered. And every year they have responded. Every year they have looked to increase the income that they can get, and they have looked to reduce their costs. And the result of that is that they have cut their costs since 2010 from 6.5 million to now 4.4 million. Now, these may be discretionary services, but that does not mean that they are not very important to the residents of this county. Indeed, the well-being and the health of the next generation should be amongst our most important considerations. And what we want to do is to ensure that we have a service that will deliver those objectives. And it has become increasingly obvious that we have now reached the point at which the well has run dry as far as this council is concerned. It can no longer look at taking money from these services. Instead, it is faced with the fact that if any further cuts were to be imposed, we would be looking at a reduction in services. And with those reduction in services would undoubtedly come a reduction in jobs. We want to ensure that these services have the best opportunity, not just to survive, but to improve and give even better service over the years to come. And we have therefore spent a lot of time, and officers particularly, been working on this for 2 years, with our consultants as well, to try and fine-tune what is before you today. And you've got 250-page report, which just shows the amount of work that has been put into this to try and ensure that we have got the best opportunity and the best model going forward. We've consulted widely throughout this process, both with staff, obviously, who are directly affected, but also with other stakeholders as well who use the services. And from those consultations, you will see that the alternative delivery model comes out as the preferred choice. It's true that there are other authorities who've done this before. Most of them have found that the move has been highly successful. A few have found that it's not worked, which is why we have spent a lot of time on trying to ensure that the model that we bring forward now is the right model. We are not alone in our area, indeed, in doing this. In Torvine, they have set up Torvine Leisure, I think it's called, and that has been going for 3 and 4 years. It's been applauded as a well-run trust, and it has year on year brought reduced extra savings to the council by asking for less money to go into it. We've also had Newport, with Newport, what's it called? Newport Live, isn't it? Newport Live has also come on stream, a similar model, and back just a couple of weeks ago, the Assembly member for Newport East stood up in the plenary of the Assembly and applauded the new trust model that Newport had got, and asked the Minister, Alan Davis, or Cabinet Member, I'm sorry, if he would also endorse the views of how well they'd done. He did that, and while he was speaking, he suggested that other councils should also look favourably on such a scheme. And so we have the Labour government and the Labour Party, well, some of the Labour Party, perhaps not all of them, in favour of this as well. So we are moving forward with our plans, and we have now got to the point where we need to take it a stage further, where we need to officers to look into the future management plan, 5-year management plan, and then we as a council, every one of us, will have to be assured that what comes back is what we're looking for. This is not a selling off of the assets. Indeed, all of the assets will be retained by the council, and it is not floating off a trust into a position where we have no control. What we are looking for is an arm's length organisation that can be built up in the best way possible to take forward their plans. Any business that starts up must by necessity look forward and be assured of some funding for 3 or 4 years to come, and this one is no different. And any business that sets up also looks at the various tax implications that are involved, and they might look up one path and say, shall we go there, or shall we go up another path? And any business with any sense would look up the opportunity where the tax being asked is as low as possible. That's what businesses do. This will be a business at arm's length, but it will be a business which, if we are not satisfied with the way that it is operating, we will be able to call back in. We will have the ability to say this isn't working, and we will call it in. I am satisfied. I'll be honest, at the outset of this, I wasn't convinced this was the right model, but as we've moved forward and we've examined it in more and more detail, I am absolutely convinced that if we want a healthy population that are being supported by not only our leisure centres, but all the other services that are offered through the countryside section, through the various tourist opportunities we have. This is the best opportunity for the residents of Monmouthshire to have a good service which actually improves into the future. And I commend this report to members.
Before we go on to debating it, would the ladies and gentlemen on the front table like to introduce themselves so we all know who they are? Thank you.
Marie Bartlett, Finance Manager.
I'm Kevin Ford from Anthony Collins, advising on the business planning side.
And I'm Olga Dutton. I'm from Anthony Collins, advising on the legal side.
Ian Saunders, Head of Tourism, Leisure, Culture and Youth Services.
It's broke, is it? Oh, Mark Howcroft, Acting Head of Finance.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I thank the Deputy Leader for clarifying about why Cabinet established the ADM and it wasn't the remit of this council. And I appreciate that clarification. Obviously, there's merits in this model, but we ultimately oppose it. We prefer the transform in-house option. And I'll set out the reasons why we oppose this now. In effect, in essence, a lot of the business model is built on a tax avoidance. That is how we save majority of the money. It's a tax avoidance scheme, which obviously, if you talk about the ongoing impacts of public services and finances and the ongoing expenditure in the UK or Welsh government, it's something that doesn't sit well with us in that regard. So we have concerns about that. We also have concerns about the element of borrowing, where the organisation, as we understand it, I'm sure I'll happy to be corrected, the Monmouthshire has to borrow on behalf of this organisation for it to do whatever it wants to do. But the ultimate guarantor, if in the worst case scenario this organisation fails, is the taxpayer. So we're taking out of directly elected councillors immediate direct control, and then and if it fails, who gets the blame? Us, presumably, and we had next to no control over it. And who picks up the tab? Taxpayers. So we're very uncomfortable with that position, considering if you're going to borrow the money for an organisation, you might as well borrow the money and keep it in-house. I accept that some ways it's been more successful than others, and that there's been a consideration of that. But you can only see in recent examples where in other local authorities, particularly in England, they've embarked in those models and they've failed dramatically. I'm not sure that Northampton did a Teckle company, but their whole ethos was outsourcing, in effect, for tax avoidance as well. Services such as this, but they went further, they went beyond leisure centres, but they really went the whole hog of hiving off services, and now they're bankrupt. Now I accept that actually the cuts in Westminster probably had the biggest say on that from the Conservatives in Westminster, but the hiving off of services doesn't always work. And it's always a taxpayer that picks up the tab. And who suffered in a Northampton case? The most vulnerable, by a mile. So, you know, we've got to be very careful about this. This is not the land of milk and honey. And I've heard some officers talk about it like that. This will deliver this, X, Y, and Z. It makes me deeply uncomfortable because I've only been around 6 years in public service, and I've rarely seen an option given to anyone where it's the land of milk and honey. And so to talk of it in that terms concerns me greatly. And to be honest, we have grave concerns about the business acumen of the administration. And we're going to talk about CMC squared, but we've been down this road before, haven't we? And we lost £140,000 of taxpayers' money, in effect. That's what it cost us to settle up the tab. And we're just not confident you can deliver. And it's up to you to convince us. We're not totally implacable, but you really need to convince us, given the track record of the administration. And we'd obviously need to see the management agreement and the business acumen being brought in to make sure it succeeds in that sense. Having said that, with the business, and you said it's going to be run like a business, it's not rocket science running businesses to a certain extent. You need to cut costs and make a profit. In that sense, that's the imperative of a business, no matter what you do. So presumably, this is going to have to cut costs dramatically somewhere. Profit itself isn't going to be the kicker. So if you look at the cost, it's overwhelmingly employees, overwhelmingly staff. And we appreciate that staff are being tupied over, but that's only good as of to the day of transfer. So I know this is not the time when we will see the management agreement, but putting our cards on the table now, we would look for a 5-year management guarantee of terms and conditions over those 5-year period for all staff terms and conditions. So we would look for that to allay some of our fears around staffing. Obviously, we have fears over scrutiny as well, because it's taken out of this chamber and out of elected officials' hands. And I realise that MCC nominates people to the board, and we would appreciate, like in other circumstances, and we've called for this in MHA, if we were going to go ahead with this, to put an opposition member, whoever that is, wherever the council changes to be, but the opposition, have a member on that board. So there is that critical eye that maybe is not the administration's eye. So we would like that in the management agreement as well. So that's our kind of position on it. We would also like to see, if possible, a cap on executive pay. And we would like to see at a ratio of 20-1 as well, to keep sure that whoever earns the most doesn't earn more than 20 times the lowest paid. Inequality in this country is growing at a dramatic rate, and this is a small step, a minor step, but if we could put something of that level, maybe not that ratio, but a ratio, and we're putting 20-1 in there as a guideline to cap executive pay, so it never goes beyond that's unacceptable to basically our voters. So we'd like to see that as well. In essence, we're not totally hostile, but we are opposed. We do feel public services should remain in public hands. We would have, well, we're happy to be convinced. You just said we were too ideological, and now when we say we're not, you laugh. Public services should stay in public hands. That's our philosophy. But given the circumstances we're in, given austerity implemented from London, there is a lot of limited opportunity. So if we can cap executive pay, secure workers' terms and conditions over a 5-year period, ensure more accountability and scrutiny with opposition, we'd be minded to be more kind of more supportive later down the line.
Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start with what I regard as quite a serious complaint, Madam Chair. In this very chamber earlier this week, a member of the Conservative group accused me of being a champagne socialist. What an insult to the chair of the Gwent campaign for real ale. And I promise you I will never drink champagne in this building. The other bit, the socialist bit, I was very proud of, because that talks to me about public services being delivered by public bodies for the people. One of our forefathers talked about, from the people, for the people. And I think that's a very fine philosophy to follow. I'd like some guarantees on two quite specific areas. Looking around the chamber, I am probably going back so far that I'm one of the few, if perhaps the only person in this room who will remember the old Monmouthshire dual committee for running leisure facilities in our leisure centres. And I can well remember as a young officer, actually had a full head of black hair in those days, attending the joint committee with the leader of Gwent County Council, and meeting counterparts from the 5 boroughs in the old county. And it was a very simple, and I believe at the time, a unique framework, which meant that our leisure centres were the property of the schools in the day and of the community beyond the school day. And the costs were divvied out accordingly. Many people today wonder why the secondary schools are having to pay out so much money to the leisure centres, and why every year that seems to go up at an increasing rate. Certainly a rate increased above the rate of inflation. I am a member of a governing body of one of our secondary schools, and it certainly gives me consternation. And I would like a guarantee that if this goes ahead, and with the position of the opposition groups on the council, I fear it will. But I would like a guarantee that if it goes ahead, the costs to our secondary schools, in terms of the money they are expected to pay to the leisure centres for the provision of services, would not increase above the rate of inflation, that they will not be a soft target for increasing the income of our brand new private venture leisure centres. The second area is about the links with the health authority. And I can speak really very personally here, because in 2009 I had quite a serious stroke and was unable to work for quite a long period of time. But then as rehabilitation set in, I was referred by the NHS to join the Abergavenny Leisure Centre. I was in the leisure centre benefiting from its services earlier today. The guy next to me on an exercise bike was carrying his oxygen around with him next to him. There is a very clear public service here, irrespective of making a profit and reducing the demands on the county that we've heard about. There is a need to maintain the public service element of our leisure centres, so that I would still be able to benefit if I had my stroke now instead of all those years ago. And that the guy next to me with his oxygen cylinder on the bike this morning will continue to be able to use those services. And the second guarantee I would like is that there will be no diminution or increase in costs for those people referred to our leisure centres as part of their rehabilitation programme. I find the whole idea slightly bizarre, coming to us at a time when Conservative councils across the whole of the UK are desperately trying to bring services back in-house, that we are negotiating and discussing going the other way. I think there's a great corollary with the railway system, where a few years ago we were told there was no alternative but to privatise. We now look at the East Coast Main Line franchise, where the franchise holders, having milked it dry, are throwing it back to the government. Last time that happened on the East Coast Main Line, the government managed to run it at a profit, whereas Richard Branson apparently can't. You know, I started off talking about champagne socialists. And another nice phrase from politics in the 1980s was Tina. Margaret Thatcher's favourite phrase, there is no alternative. It sounds like that's what we're being told now. Chair, I don't find many Conservative colleagues in this room over-enamoured by the policies of Mrs Thatcher anymore. There are alternatives, and I think that on the Labour side here, we would very strongly suggest that the way forward is to retain this in public ownership and public services provided by public organisations such as this county council. And I would also share the leader of the Labour group's pledge that we will oppose this. Thank you.
Councillor Easton. No, Councillor Watts, sorry, mixed the two up.
Thank you, Chair. I too am a socialist, and I always believed in from the cradle to grave, not from the cradle to grave if you can afford the subscription fee. So I am concerned about it, that we are missing out some of the, or potentially could be missing out on some of the demographic who will need to use this service. I'm additionally concerned about the potential for it carrying debt. And in particular, and if I've got this terribly wrong, then please explain it to me, Monmouth Comprehensive moved the swimming pool into the leisure centre budget. Well, I think that project was about £2-3 million. Who controls the asset and who controls the debt? I'd like some clarification about that, because that concerns me greatly. Because if it's carrying that debt, it seems to me that you're stacking the odds of its success against it itself from the beginning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's very clear to me that this has been very well thought through. It's taken 2 years and it's not been done in a hurry, and I'm very encouraged by it, and I shall certainly be supporting it. In Llanelli Hill, a lot of my residents can't afford to get to a leisure centre because the leisure centre in Abergavenny is a long way away, and many of them don't have cars to be able to get there either. And yet we live in the most beautiful part of Monmouthshire, and a lot of those residents have got facilities right outside their front door. And up to now, we haven't really put the investment into that area to really expand the opportunities for the residents. So I think this presents a really fantastic opportunity for us to be able to do things in places like Llanelli Hill that we haven't done up to now. This is a very innovative and forward-thinking council. Contrary to what has been said by the leader of the Labour Party, it's a council that is held in very high esteem throughout Wales, and I've got no doubt that this will be extremely successful, and I will certainly be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Fox.
Just a clarification, Chairman, I'm not the leader of the Labour Party, just to be clear on.
Not yet. Not yet.
I think she meant the Labour Party in this room, to me.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. Whilst I don't call myself a socialist, I'd like to think, a huge social conscience, and I can't remember actually having hair. But I'm sure I did. It's probably 20 years in this place has led most of it to go. Certainly the last few years, as Labour government have slashed away the funding to local authorities like Monmouthshire, it's diminished even further.
Will you others, please? Anybody, please, whoever you are, stop interrupting the speaker, whoever that is.
Madam Chairman, like Bob and like others, you know, I had and still have some angst around moving away from to a new model which is so different to what I entered politics for 20 years ago. As a local servant, even though we're different political parties, we came as public servants to maintain strong services to our communities and manage those on their behalf. So it is a big shift for those of us who've been around a long time doing this role. However, I have to face the reality of change that we're currently in. Diminishing resources, which flow as they do, putting immeasurable pressure, certainly on those discretionary services. So I've asked myself, and I've beat myself up, challenging myself around, well, how do we preserve locally accessible services? How do we maintain access, as Martin said, to people? How do we make sure those services aren't diminished going forward? Because as resources get strangled from us, certainly from government in Cardiff Bay, as they get strangled from us, we're put into this difficult decision to make choices. Do we continue funding social services and education, or do we keep putting money into the culture offer and all those elements? So, and we know the answer is to that. So we've got to find a sustainable way forward. What's key to me, whilst we've made the decision as we have in Cabinet, that's paved the way for this debate and some further debates, which are fundamentally important to how we evolve this going forward. And Dimitri referenced the management agreement. And that is absolutely fundamental. The governance arrangements that we as this council will have to agree to in due course will be absolutely fundamental to me, to others, before we can actually finally say this is the right thing. And the service level agreements which will accompany that, to protect the interests we have in leisure centres, our schools, and all those areas. That's where we've got to play a massive part in shaping the governance structure so it's sustainable, resilient, and it does what we want it to do, and it holds accountable to us. And being arm's length and the assets retaining with us and the opportunity, break clauses, whatever we'll have in the agreement, I'm confident that we don't lose this. This isn't just shipping it out to the private sector. This is the public sector working in a different way. And I think we need to recognise that we do need to work in different ways. As Bob shared, ministers two ministers, cabinet secretary, are recognising that we need to do things in different ways and are embracing the opportunities. And other authorities across Wales who have strong social consciences as well have already moving down that model. Because it's not about just trying to shift something out for the sake of it. It's trying to sustain things for a long-term future so that we know they won't get peeled away or subject to further cuts where the offer diminishes and we can't offer the quality of service to that person who needs it in recovery from hospital or whatever. And I just believe providing we structure the right type of governance, the right type of management agreements, we get the right type of board in place, and I have no issue with some of the things which Dimitri talked about, having opposition recognition on that board. I can't see any problem with that. You know, there's loads of things we need to have a debate about, but you know, it's probably not going to be so much for today. But when they present to us back, when these things come back to us, I presume it's be nearer October time. You know, that's where we'll need to be all clearly, you know, happy with what we see, because I think we'll all share the concerns that we get this absolutely right. So it was with a heavy heart in Cabinet that I agreed to be part of moving this to this next stage. But it's not a done deal for me yet until I see those governance and service level agreements absolutely solidly in place and give me the confidence that we are entrusting these valuable services to an organisation which can preserve them and make them do what we want them to do. Thank you.
Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've got the same feelings that Councillor Greenland had and Councillor Fox had. I was a bit concerned about this model. I wasn't convinced it's the right way. I'm still not convinced it's the right way forward. I do believe that we should have a model which is more strengthened and will work better for the public of the county. But talking about this model in particular, it says to me, what scrutiny will we have as members when this is enacted? Because obviously the decision is going to be taken this afternoon. And would we have a cabinet member to deal with on the matter of leisure services, or would we lose that cabinet member? But I raised 19 questions with Mrs. Bartlett. Mrs. Bartlett answered the questions, sorry, and some of them still don't give me the answers that I'm looking for. You have said since I had this answer that the assets will remain within Monmouthshire County Council, and it then leaves the £4.4 million of assets delivery of maintenance we need to do. There's no indication to me that this model will provide that £4.4 million over the next 4 or 5 years, because the model is based on the fact of having to put in maybe £155,000 a year for the next number of years just to stand still. So that says to me that no maintenance is going to be done of any valuable nature. For example, we can look at Caldicot Castle, £3 million. That is a long, long way off, and I appreciate that. I am relieved to hear that the staff who were transferred will still have their pension rights. That was a big concern that I had, and that has been clarified. I did question in the report the numbers of visitors which was independently said they were audited. I questioned those visitor numbers. I do not believe they're correct. I could challenge them because they just don't make sense to me. So I do feel within the paper, the decision was taken. I think there's a lot more, as Councillor Fox has said, there's a lot more to be addressed in the future. And should this model fail or be on the brink of failing, or look as if it's failing, that immediate action is taken to bring it back in, not let it fail and then try to pick up the pieces after that. I asked the question regarding, would this be more resilient a case than the one in Borough Theatre? The Borough Theatre is a problem that I understand may be brought back in-house. I could be wrong, but if the Borough Theatre is anything to go by, this doesn't look much better. So I would ask that should Cabinet or the Council see this system beginning to fail, that action is taken pretty sharply to stop it failing, rather than let it fail and then pick up more problems afterwards. Most of the other questions I was going to ask and points I'm going to make have been made, so I, at this moment in time, am not convinced it's the right thing to do, and I can't support it at this point in time.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first say, I have to say, I was quite horrified by the idea of a 20-to-1 cap. I think in this organisation, our cap is something like, or the ratio is something like 7-to-1 between our lowest paid full-time equivalent in the chief executive, so I would suggest that we want to go for a much more similar ratio. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Anyway, just to make that point, I think it's probably worthwhile noting, and also perhaps for anybody watching who might think that we have some sort of similar arrangement in place, which would be a concern, I'm sure, to all of us. A couple of points, really. I suppose we're in a situation where we're recognising that we can't continue to run the service in the same way because there are issues. It's a very long paper, and it has a lot of detail in there. But there are some things which, for me, are not in there clearly enough at this stage. And perhaps you'll say that I have to wait until we move forward. But there are a couple of things which I would appreciate clarity on. I think nobody is going to find palatable an alternative where we are effectively choosing to close one of our leisure centres or because we can no longer afford to run it. That's not an option any of us want to be faced with. And I think we have to look into the future. I've got some concerns around, this model, other models in particular, taking, so effectively an arm's length model of running our very important services. But a couple of things that I don't really get from in here. It talks about us looking for income from other sources, in particular, very important, apparently, to be a charity because we can access other resources. I don't know if members have looked around and seen the shrinkage in the third sector because that money is simply not being accessed particularly well in Wales. But so many organisations are no longer, for example, whereas they may have looked to the lottery and other sources, they're not getting money from those places that they've got them for. There are a huge list of charitable funds. But ultimately, I think that there are some inherent risks in looking for sources of funding, because we want to run core services that we are going to want to run that may change, but what we don't want is a menu which we've got 3 years funding for, and then that ends and we are kind of back to square one. So I'm a little concerned about that area, having sourced money from many of the funds you've got listed. There are also some which clearly, and I don't know who put together this list, that clearly would never be appropriate and would never get money for an organisation with such a large turnover. So again, I think there are some questions around how exactly we intend to do that. I also think that it's about us understanding what our risk appetite is for some of these different ways of delivering services. Because what we're saying is we're going to deliver them differently. We're going to take on opportunities that we haven't been able to because we're restricted as a local authority. What I don't get, really, is the sense of how we're going to enable those staff that are moving over to operate in a different culture. I don't get that sense from here. And that, to me, is probably the biggest risk, the single biggest risk in following a different model. And I'm not convinced that we've really got the answers to that in here. And I think that will certainly be my biggest concern when further information comes forward. I also don't get from here, given the way that we're talking about services, is anything around collaboration with our other partners. So, Councillor Groker mentioned health, for example. We talk about the 5 ways of working, integrating services, but I don't see that so clearly in this. And I would have thought that if we were looking for opportunities in the future, that's where some of them may lie, and threats, obviously, too. And then the last thing, and I think that we would all, given Councillor Petruni's concerns around operating costs and what that might look like in the future, I think we'd want to see some assurances that we don't suddenly develop some kind of top-heavy structure where all of a sudden the roles and responsibilities that people had when they were in a local authority look very different in a different organisation, because to a certain extent that's happened in other organisations, And I think that we'd want some assurances around that. And I would guess, actually, so would the Cabinet. But I'm not sure that all the answers are in here. I think we're almost taking a leap into the unknown without having some of those. And I appreciate we can't have everything, but I would certainly want to see much more of that before we, when we come to talk about the governance structures and what the detail looks like at the next stage. So I'd like some assurances about some of those points, if possible, Chair. Thank you.
Before we get to Councillor Watkins, and then Councillor Anna Davis, and then if there's nobody else after that, I'll get Councillor Green to sum up. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Sorry.
I too was concerned when I first read about the ADM, and I really welcomed the opportunity to attend the Joint Scrutiny Committee on that and be able to actually ask my questions and have all my questions answered. So I really appreciated that possibility to talk in a very frank way. I felt the discussion around VAT, which hasn't actually been particularly mentioned, quite illuminating and really showed a very strong business case for why we really do need to look seriously at the ADM model. I also welcome the possibility of the potential for other investment into our attractions. In particular, Caldecott Castle within my ward is always an area of concern for me, and I really do feel like the ADM provides us with the best possibilities to find additional sources of funding, because the castle is beautiful, but very old and also very costly. So we do need to find additional ways to help keep these attractions within open and accessible for residents of Monmouthshire, and I really do think that exploring the ADM in this way is very helpful, and therefore I will be supporting us continuing to look at it very closely.
Sir Alan Davies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to talk about finances and whose fault it is and or party political broadcasts and all sorts of things, because I don't think this is the forum that we should be doing that. I mean, we have what we got, and this is the situation we are in, and it's a question of doing the best we can with it, isn't it? The question, therefore, is this the best way to go? And I'm very pleased to see that on the Cabinet side there are also, questions in the mind still. Because let's make no mistake about it, this is a challenge. It is a big, big challenge. And the key for me, whether I decided at the moment the opposition are not supporting it, there's not enough detail in my view, and the key to this is that business plan. I need to see that business plan and be convinced that the right things are in place, because there is no doubt that there is opportunity here. I mean, there are concerns, and I think, people will start shaking their heads when people talk about CMC squared and other things that haven't quite gone according to plan, if I put it that way. And I think the losses are quite significantly more than those that Councillor Petrudi indicated. But they happened, and we learn from those experiences. But I think there's a genuine concern amongst people, and, we're talking about staff and people's jobs here as well, that if this is the way that the council goes, there needs to be business acumen representation, and that's not to decry what the people that we already got, but we all got our own area of expertise, and there's a different culture, I think, required in this environment than there perhaps is in local government. I think everybody recognises that. So, at the moment, I need to see that business plan. I'd like to see ambition within it, because these services are key. If we go for the well-being and all the other things we need to do, these services are a key part of delivering on that agenda. And it's very important that we are absolutely convinced that this is the right way to go, and we have the right business plan in place to deliver. And if it is the right business plan, it can deliver a lot. If it's not, I suggest we'll be back here in a short period of time, bringing it back within the council. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think we have I thought this might be a group, actually. Councillor Paul Pavier, followed by Councillor Paul Jordan, and followed by the Chief Executive, Paul Matthews. So, Paul Pavier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to look at this from a committee chair perspective, first of all. The committee had a special joint scrutiny session middle of January, just before the Cabinet met to discuss this and make a decision. It was clear from the development of the options appraisals that was presented before the committee that this work has not been done overnight. This work has not been done on the back of a fag packet. Much, and like a Labour colleagues were peddling in a local by-election in Chepstow not so long ago. but there's been a lot of scrupulous analysation of this work, and a huge amount of due diligence has gone on, and a lot of officer time and resource has been put into this. We explored commercial risk and commercial success, and what our level of tolerance and risk is as a council, and whether we have learned lessons from previous projects and initiatives. We explored our long-term regional collaboration with our other local authorities within our health board region. We looked at integration, and we looked at commissioning of services with the NHS. We explored the financial rationale of tax and VAT. We explored the maintenance backlog of our current assets. We explored the capacity of our business expertise and acumen and what was required going forward. And certainly corporate and trust fundraisers would be part of that. And we also touched on the culture of the new organisation and what that change would mean for our staff. Of course, there were caveats, as already been mentioned by the Cabinet member, in relation to governance and what arrangements would need to be put in place for the SLAs and other management agreements. And I absolutely agree they have to be watertight, and there must be a mechanism to allow the authority to bring the service back in an easy way, or an efficient way, if the performance of the new organisation is not meeting with the council's aspirations. And I agree with Councillor Eason. We shouldn't let the organisation fail and continue to fail before a decision is made. I think that would have to be done early on. But from a personal perspective, and I think what has been already addressed by the leader and the Cabinet member responsible, things have to change. We know the authority's financial position is extremely challenging going forward. The demographic pressures, we all know, that the vast majority of our budget, which continues to shrink on an annual basis, has to be spent on statutory services. We know this. And yet our leisure services are asked to front up hundreds of thousands of pounds each year to fund those statutory services. And that can't continue in perpetuity. It cannot. We can't ask our residents, our service users, leisure services, tourism services, to pay more and get less. It's not sustainable. We have to change. As the Cabinet member said, it's been done within our region and it's been done successfully. I agree the details in terms of caveats need to be ironed out, but I'm fully supportive of this. The committee was on whole supportive, although there was a couple of members that abstained. But I think we should be moving forward on this, and I'd like to give it my backing. Thank you.
Councillor Paul Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to start by first allaying any fears of Councillor Grocott, because if he had attended the Cabinet meeting on the 29th of January, he'd have seen that Cabinet members were very concerned of the relationship between the ADM and the schools. And it's in our view that that relationship must be protected, and we were unanimous on that front. Let's not make any bones about it. This is not yet a done deal. Unless the governance arrangements between the ADM and Monmouthshire County Council are satisfactory so far as we're concerned, this just won't happen. And there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of scrutiny as to what those governance arrangements are going to be. We must protect the interests of Monmouthshire County Council and the people of Monmouthshire.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think I'll be fairly brief. I think looking at the paperwork on this, I think that the ADM is the best option at the current time. It has the advantages, for example, in relation to if leisure centres become charitable trusts, they're able to apply for grants to help with resources. And I think the concern I have is in relation to governance and to that was mentioned originally, you know, to make sure that there is that accountability. So I think it is important that we look further at the governance side, and I think that's what we've just been told will happen. And, you know, it is important that we do get that right as well, you know, so that we can, if things do go wrong, so that, you know, we have a method of putting forward our residents' concerns. So in terms of the principle of the ADM, I'm very much supportive of that, and that's something that councils elsewhere have done in order to keep going these important discretionary services, and you know, from that point of view I'm very, very supportive of it. But the caveat again is just to make sure that we do get this governance structure right, because accountability, democratic accountability, to me is very important. Thank you.
Kelly, you want to say a few words before we finish?
Yes, if I could please, Chairman. Just a few points. I've been trying to capture some of the issues as some of those questions have been asked, because I think it is important that we do answer them. So just on some of those individual questions around schools, I think you'll see from the draft business plan there is an absolute commitment to working in the same way with schools, so any increases wouldn't be applied over the inflationary rate, and the same with pay as well on key staffing and senior positions. You will see that those rates are the same as the rates are now. So, you know, we have assumed as is in terms of staffing that senior complement at this time. In terms of some of the issues raised around third sector grants and investment and new funding opportunities, this isn't just about the third sector. I think we've been very careful to articulate that, because we recognise some of those issues which Councillor Taylor alluded to. But if you take examples such as the government's new industrial strategy and the Challenge Fund, there's about 3.6 billion a year available across the UK for that. And okay, that's not money for the leisure industry, but that is money to tackle big societal problems like the ageing population. That's one of the grand challenges. Another grand challenge is around public health and how we can invest in keeping people well, not just treating them when they become sick. That money, that investment, does not go to public bodies. That's only available to non-public bodies. So it facilitates a new kind of partnership working. So I think we have to keep new opportunities in our line of sight, not just the traditional ones that we've become used to. And to give further assurance, the draft business plan that you have in front of you is not predicated on any speculative income or investment. So anything that we could achieve in the ilk that I've just talked about would be additionality and over and above. Just to address some of the wider issues, though, because I think the word ideology was mentioned, and clearly as an officer, I can't comment on that. But what I can comment on quite clearly is pragmatism, which is what I think is the key concept that we've tried to adopt here. Alternative delivery models, trusts, are not articles of faith. They're not. They're things to be worked at. And I think lots of the comments and observations made this afternoon will be really helpful as we continue to work at this. So the case for an alternative delivery model, which, you know, don't forget, has been run in tandem with the in-house model. So this has never been a one-horse race. I think we've been quite clear about all of the options all of the way through, is driven, I believe, entirely by evidence, data and pragmatism. Evidence, data and pragmatism. We've actually been at this for nearly 3.5 years, so there's no bulldoze in here. We've taken our time, and I think all aspects of the process have always been very open and transparent. But as many of you members have alluded to, the real opportunity now is to work on shaping and informing those new governance structures, to formulate the evaluation matrices, to make sure that we can inform a very robust management agreement, and to make sure that committees, you know, like the Audit Committee, play a key and active role in this, as I think commitments have been made to. Equally with Democratic Services Committee in deciding what proper and robust scrutiny should look like. I think there's sometimes a danger in using other high-profile examples of failure, Because so often we hold up that mirror and we say, well, if this doesn't work, it must be this. And I don't think it's as simplistic and binary as that. But I do think we have to learn lessons. I think that's very much the sensible thing to do. And to be pragmatic, I think it's that word again. And as we've seen in the case of the business plan and the business case for the alternative delivery model, it's about that right mix of different roles. So I think we've talked and we've set out very clearly in the report the TECL, the trade-in and the charitable dimensions, the need to be very open. If we're going to experiment, we do it quickly so we know what we're getting into. And I think it's about navigating that path to getting that balance right. And I think that's the key thing that we have to learn. How do we get those checks and balances, all of which you've alluded to, absolutely right. And just to emphasise one final time, the management agreement is the umbrella document which encases and encapsulates all of that. And through the mechanisms that I've just set out, through Audit Committee, Democratic Services Committee, by any work that members want to contribute, I think that's what we'll be able to achieve.
Paul?
Kelly's just caught most of the points I was going to make before handing back to Councillor Greenland to sum up, really. So I would just add these. I think I thank the Chamber for the thoughtful way that you've conducted this debate, actually. The tone, I think, is representative of the gravity of the decision. This is a big decision. We have several responsibility, both for the people that potentially we transfer into a new organisation, but we share several responsibility also for the consumers, the users, the clientele of those services. So, this is a biggie. There's no two ways about that. I guess I conclude by just reminding you or restating what Kelly just said today. This decision that you're being asked to make is not the end of the game. If you sanction today's report, you enable your officers to continue to move forward and come back to you with a further decision. It will be a full council decision where you will be asked to commit to a management agreement. If I just change that language a little bit, that is the document that spells out your expectations for potentially a new organisation. If you are not satisfied that that document describes the sort of organisation that you want to enfranchise, then you have the ability to say no. Amongst those issues, and not limited to those issues, will be issues such as ethical employment, ethical supply chains, and things of that nature. I think my wife would be delighted if you set a 20-to-1 executive pay cap, because I'd slap in the first single status equal pay claim and see my salary extend by 4 or 5 times. We tend to work on the basis of ratios of 7, 4 or 5 to 1. And frankly, if you don't want to work on those ratios in the public service, then you should leave the public service. It's not about vast incomes to do the work that we do. So I think I would hope as when we have big decisions, I just like to clarify that you know the basis of the decision that you're about to vote on. I think you do. I think it's important that you understand that it's not the end of the game. This just enfranchises further work so that you're able to make a fully informed, conscious choice later in the year.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order. I did specifically ask about the amount of debt potentially that this organisation could be saddled up with. Alex made a specific point about the pool in Monmouth and what happens there. Nobody has attempted to ask, you expect me to stand here or sit here and vote on something that I have absolutely no understanding of when it comes to the business case and the amount of debt that it will be saddled with and whether or not it can overcome that. It is bonkers.
Do my best. The organisation, if you choose to support it, would not be saddled with any debt. The assets, I think Kelly, you referenced, but I think it's been referenced in earlier inputs. The asset base of this organisation, as currently proposed, the ownership thereof would remain with the council. So the investments that we make are in assets that would remain with us. We would not saddle a startup organisation with debt that it wasn't able to service. Hopefully that answers your question as explicitly as I can. I'd like to think that's clear for you.
Councillor Greenland, perhaps you'd like to say something, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would also like to echo the Chief Executive's remarks about the quality of the debate, about the questions, and the various comments that have been made. I think they've been all very helpful. For me, the most important part of this decision is that the services that are covered by the future ADM are the best services that we can deliver for the people of Monmouthshire. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve the people of Monmouthshire. And it is quite clear to me that the in-house model, the transform in-house model, doesn't fit that bill. But that the ADM has a very good chance at this stage. We've yet to see the management plan, but at this stage, it has the best opportunity to provide the sort of services right across the board that we would like to see for our residents in the county. And the biggest advantage of moving away from the model that we have, for me, is that we will have an organisation that is able to plan for its future. It's not been able to do that in the past. It's been always waiting for what the cut is going to come in the next budget. And it's never really been able to look at where they need to invest and how they can grow that organisation into the future. Yes, of course, there will be advantages in the proposals from a tax point of view. But any organisation needs to take into account tax efficiency. It would be crazy not to do so, and that's what this organisation will be doing. Just going through a couple of the points that I've picked up from that members have been saying, and maybe actually if I haven't covered anything by the end of this, and I know Kelly and the Chief Executive have been pretty covered an awful lot of it anyway. But just a few points that members have picked up. First of all, Councillor Petruni mentioned, well, the taxpayer is going to pick up the bill from this organisation if it fails. Well, actually, if the current organisation fails, the taxpayer picks it up as well. It is exactly the same. No difference. And of course, we've heard the old cherry coming back of the CMC squared. For the benefit of new members, let me put the other side of the coin very, very quickly. No, you don't like to hear this side of it. CMC, just look at the other side of the coin. The reason why CMC finished with that balance was because it developed a piece of software for social services. It replaced a piece of software that didn't do the job that it was meant to do, and social services were paying an annual license fee of over £100,000 a year, and it's still saving that money year on year now. But more importantly for me, it enabled care workers to be able to spend much more time on what they are employed to do, looking after people, than filling in bits of paper. I make no apologies whatsoever for CMC squared. The good that it has done for this council in producing that is quite evident, and it's a pity that those who bring it up time after time don't look at the other side of the coin. And there are other things as well that they've done as well, again, which aren't mentioned. Staff. Staff are vitally important to us, and throughout this whole process, they have been regularly consulted. And in fact, I think it was in October last year was the last, they were asked, are you in favour now of moving to this organisation? And I think 68% of them said they wanted to move. They accept that the culture within the council is holding them back. They want to go forward with this new culture. As far as scrutiny, is concerned, that's up to the council to bring in whatever scrutiny it decides is appropriate. It's not for the organisation to do something without being watched. If the council wants to bring in scrutiny arrangements, it can do whatever it wants. Now, there are other suggestions that we take forward, and I think some of those are very useful, and we'll certainly look at all of those on board. But the one I want to just mention at the moment, which I can tell you I would certainly support, is the position of an opposition member on the board. We've done that already with the 21st Century board, with Councillor Harris, who's given a huge amount to that board, and I think it would be a good model going forward. So I personally, when we're in those discussions, will support that going forward. The issues of the guarantees for schools, I think Kelly has covered that, but if other officers want to mention anything about that, I'll leave that to them. And then we've also, the health service, our association with the health service is vital. The GP referral scheme is vital. And this is something that must continue, most certainly. Now, I can't give any guarantees about costs for patients moving forward. That's impossible under any scheme. But I certainly would want to see the way that we interact with the health service, not just staying where it is, but actually becoming more deeply involved with that. Councillor Eason mentioned the Borough Theatre. This is an entirely different type of setup to the Borough Theatre. It is absolutely not comparable in any means at all. And this is going to be an arm's length organisation of this council, not a trust that is floated off into the distance. Councillor Frances Taylor mentioned that she was not very confident that there would be funding coming from the third sector by moving into this model. Well, already we have had evidence, maybe a small bit of evidence, but evidence in the form of Chepstow TIC that had that been outside of the council, it would have benefited from a grant to put in catering facilities to bring in extra income from there. We were refused that grant as a council. So I've no doubt that there are lessening grants coming from other organisations, but they are still there.
Sorry, Chair.
And we will be looking for those.
Point of order.
Yes, I have. Sorry, it's by way of personal explanation. I didn't say that I wasn't confident that money would come. I said that if we look outside into the third sector, we will see a massive shrinkage of where people have got, because the list that we have here is for charitable funding sources in principle. And what I said was that we need to understand the environment outside that we're getting into. So yes, it may be possible, but some of the funding streams that are listed there are not appropriate for an organisation with a turnover of this size, even if it becomes a charitable trust.
Thank you very much. Will you let Councillor Greenan finish summing up?
As I acknowledged, those funding streams are getting more difficult to get, but they are still there, and I'm sure that we will be able to get them. Councillors Watkins and Davis have both wanted assurances about the access to residents. And again, that is at the heart of what we want to do. This is something that we are doing for the residents of this council, for the residents of this county. And Councillor Jordan mentioned the relationship with schools again. Absolutely vitally important, and I don't know whether officers want to go further on that. And then Councillor Brown has pointed out absolutely that the key to this going forward is governance. And that's what we will be looking at in detail when the management plan comes back to us in the course of time. At this point, Madam Chair, can I ask officers if they would like to, and our consultants, if they would like to add anything at the moment?
I think in response to Councillor Greenham's points, I don't think at this stage there's anything further we do need to add, actually. I think if we were at the final decision-making point, then perhaps so. But as I indicated earlier, in many ways, what you're potentially being asked to do is to grant an enabling decision today. This isn't a final yes or no. So I'm content that we can leave answers to some of those points to later in the process.
Okay, what we then come on to are the recommendations. And the two recommendations that we will be voting on now are 2.1, to agree that 155,000 be drawn from the Priority Investment Reserve to fund start-up activity for the alternative delivery model, and 2.2, to recognise the need to make provision within the medium-term financial plan as part of the budget setting process for the next 5-year period of 388,000 arising from the decision to move tourism, leisure, culture and youth services into a newly established alternative delivery model. Those are the two recommendations.
Do you have a seconder for that? All in favour of taking this forward?
Those against, please. And abstentions? It's carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Members, the chair asked you whether you were happy to leave the next report to last on the agenda. Most of you, but not necessarily all of you, will be aware that you receive an annual pay policy report for the council. This is that report. In reality, officers don't need to leave, but I've actually set a desired position that we do. And there are enough councils across Wales and the UK that have unnecessarily got themselves into difficulty in positioning officers in position of conflict, when pay in any way, shape or form is discussed. We don't choose to be one of those. So all officers are going to leave the chamber, save for Sally Thomas, who's going to come where I'm at now, and she is in a position to answer any questions that you may have. The report in itself isn't terribly exciting, I have to say, but you might find it to be so. So you'll understand why we're going to leave. There is one paragraph, particularly in there, which talks to a point that Councillor Petruni made earlier around salary differentials. I think it's from memory. I think it's paragraph 16, and I restate what I said earlier as well. Absolutely, I have no desire to be part of an organisation where those guidelines are stretched any more than they are at the moment. Indeed, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, we've been collapsing them, and I think that's good. I'll leave it to Sally.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And the purpose of this report, as it says, is to approve the publication of the council's pay policy, and that is in compliance with the Localism Act. And the recommendation is that the council approves the pay policy for the year 1st of April 17 to 31st of March 18, which sounds a little bit like it's retrospective. The reason for that, which will become clear, is that an awful lot of aspects of this pay policy aren't able to be determined at this stage. So we always wait until the end of the year. And in fact, this is the 7th iteration of this. So we've been used to that situation every year. And the council is asked to approve the nationally negotiated and agreed pay award of the JNC for local authority chief officers. The chief executive officers and the senior officers. The pay agreement reached in 2016 for chief executive officers, for instance, coming back to our point earlier on, was for a 1% pay increase effective from the 1st of April 16 and 1% effective April 17. There is no pay offer confirmed for April 18. And a similar situation in respect of the chief officers. So the Council recognises the need to have a clear written policy on pay and reward for employees, and that having a policy provides a framework to ensure that employees are rewarded fairly, objectively and without discrimination. And the policy is underpinned by the Single Status Agreement signed as a collective agreement with the trade unions on the 2nd of December 2010. And other nationally agreed terms and conditions for employees of the Council. So you can see, particularly for the benefit of new members, that this is a policy which is refreshed every year. And as I said, it's the 7th publication of the policy. It is a statutory requirement to produce and publish an annual pay policy statement, and this is it. If members have got any questions, then I'm quite certain that Sally can answer them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one question which I would have asked earlier, but the room has been emptied now. It says there's no pay award confirmed for April 2018. Well, between now and any negotiations that go on, 351 staff may well be transferred to an alternate delivery model. Will they be included in the negotiations for anything from April 2018? Please.
Thank you for the question. Yes, they would, because 2P would apply. So they're employed under those terms and conditions, so that would continue.
Okay.
Move recommendations, Madam Chairman.